Our film begins in the future with a man named Jerome, living in a barren and dry land. He says that since birth, he has never seen this place green, while his father, Ernest, saw it green in the past when fields of wheat and rice were cultivated. However, after the drought, no plants grew, and most of the farmers left, except for his father, who continued working, hoping the land would turn green again. Ernest knew the problem was the lack of water, but in this world, people kill each other for a drop of it. One day, 2 thieves tried to rob a storage owned by Ernest, but he caught one and shot him. The other thief begged for a second chance, but Ernest killed him when he saw he had a hidden gun. Jerome witnessed this and told his father that he could have asked them what they needed, and perhaps helped them instead of killing them. The storage contained an old water pump the thieves were trying to steal. After Ernest's water supply ran out, he and his son took their donkey to buy underground water sold by people with government permits. Ernest had tried for years to get enough water to cultivate the barren land, but they refused to give it for free, asking for a price he couldn't afford. On their way back after buying water, the donkey fell and broke its leg. It was in so much pain that Ernest decided to shoot it to put it out of its misery, as no one could treat it. When they returned home, Jerome's sister, Mary, had prepared food and was using sand to clean the dishes due to the lack of water. The next day, Ernest and his son went to a machinery exhibition to buy something to carry loads instead of the dead donkey. There, they found a carrying machine named Sim, which they liked, but to buy it, they had to enter a bidding auction. Ernest offered the highest bid. It turned out that Sim was involved with Mary without her father or brother's knowledge. Afterward, Ernest and his son visited Catherine, Ernest's wife, who was suffering from a rare illness and living in a hospital. She moved using a special device with wires holding her, which was too expensive for Ernest to buy so she could live with them at home. Jerome spent the whole day with his mother, then said goodbye and left with his father. On their way back, they stopped at a gas station to refuel. Ernest, thirsty and out of water, drank gasoline. A couple with a newborn baby was begging Ernest for water. The child's father, named Robbie, wanted to sell his son because he could no longer care for him or even provide water. But Ernest advised him to stop thinking that way, promising to help and provide them with water. Robbie, aware of the relationship between Mary and Fleem, told Ernest about it. When Ernest returned home, he confronted Mary about it, accusing her of going behind his back. Mary began to cry, saying she was free and that he had no right to control her life. She told her father she hated him and tried to run away, but Ernest locked her in her room and nailed the window shut. One morning, Ernest and his son woke up to find that Sim had been stolen and was missing. Ernest suspected that Fleem was the thief and went to his house, where he learned from Fleem's father that he had left early that morning and headed to the mountains. Ernest went to the mountains to find Fleem, but there, he was beaten unconscious by underground water sellers. When he woke up at night, they accused him of stealing their resources. Ernest tried to convince them he wasn't the thief, but was beaten again by the leader of the sellers, named Cleve. Ernest then pulled out his rifle and forced them to leave him alone. On his way home, he found Fleem asleep with Sim, confirming that Fleem was indeed the thief. Ernest aimed his rifle at Fleem, but Sim woke up and was taken hostage. Ernest planned to hand Fleem over to the sellers to prove his innocence, but on the way, Fleem talked about Mary, which infuriated Ernest. They continued walking until they became too thirsty to go on and stopped to rest. Fleem convinced Ernest to give him a bottle of water to drink, and after they both drank, they talked. Fleem tried to persuade Ernest to free him and split the money they would earn from selling the resources, but Ernest insisted on handing him over to the sellers. Ernest then felt exhausted, began to sweat, and could no longer walk. Fleem noticed this and threw a rock at him, causing Ernest to hit a rock behind him, which made his head bleed until he lost consciousness and collapsed. When he regained consciousness, he found himself tied up in Sim's place instead of Fleem. Fleem kept pouring water into Ernest's mouth as he screamed in pain. One day, Fleem returned to Ernest's house alone on his motorcycle and took Mary out with him. When Mary saw him, she ran to him and hugged him tightly, overjoyed to see him again. Jerome was worried about his father, who had been missing for several days, so he went out to look for him. By chance, he found Sim wandering alone on the road. Jerome went to the sellers, who told him that his father had died, and they believed that Sim was the killer. The next day, Ernest was buried and a funeral was held. Mary and her brother cried over their father's death. They then went to the hospital to inform their mother of what had happened, and they cried again. As they left the hospital, they met Fleem, who was waiting to drive them home. After Ernest's death, Fleem took over the family's affairs and cared for them. One day, Jerome sees Symbol, angry and striking him with a hammer, thinking he had killed his father. Symbol calms him down. Later, Symbol tells Jerome that Mary is pregnant with his child. and he loves her and won't abandon her. Jerome accepts their relationship and feels reassured about his sister being with Flam. That night, Flam talks to the farmers about sending water to Ernest's land for cultivation, but their leader, Caleb, objects. Caleb becomes exhausted when Flam blames him for Ernest's death. Flam then shows Caleb a knife that was found beside Ernest's body, scaring Caleb into agreeing to supply the water as Flam suggests. When the water arrives, everyone celebrates the first spray of water on the dry field. Flam works day and night on the land, planting wheat. After months, the wheat grows, and the land turns green after years of drought. Flam and Mary marry officially and live together in Ernest's house with Jerome. One day, Flam's father arrives with bank officials, threatening Flam that they will bear the burden of Ernest's large debt to the bank, which Flam cannot pay. Flam takes Sam and goes to his friend Ruby at night, learning that Ruby plans to sell his son. He takes Ruby to a specific place to determine his son's value. But when they arrive, Ruby realizes that Flam has arranged to sell the child to some people. They come to take the child, but Ruby resists, and Flam shoots and kills him. Chaos ensues as Flam flees with the money, firing randomly to prevent pursuit. In the midst of the chaos, Sam is shot, leading him to instinctively head toward his maker, Calvin. The next day, Flam pays off the debts on the land to the bank with the money from the child's sale. He uses the rest to sell Sam, with no one suspecting anything. Meanwhile, Sam heads toward Calvin, who lives near the border and finds Ernest's house number on Sam. Sam returns to the house and talks to Jerome about the machine that came back to him. Jerome becomes angry with Flam after learning he sold Sam to Ruby. Later, Jerome eats with his sister and her husband and asks Flam if Ruby sold Sam to his maker. Flam, feeling uneasy, stays silent, not knowing what to say. Jerome tells them he'll visit them at the hospital, but he's actually on his way to the border to meet Calvin, who made Sam. When Jerome reaches the border guards prevent him from crossing due to his young age. A girl named Anna calls out to Jerome, telling him how he can cross to the other side of the border for a fee. She hides him in a truck loaded with chickens, which crosses the border with him. Jerome then reaches Calvin and becomes unaware of his surroundings. Calvin shows Jerome the uses and functions of Sim, including how Sim's robotic eye is actually a camera that captures the path ahead, helping it walk at a specific angle. The camera records everything Sim encounters, and a recorded video shows Ernest. Jerome quickly scans through the video and finds the moment where Ernest is killed by Willem. It becomes clear that Ernest had regained consciousness on the day he was killed after previously losing it, but Willem tied him to Sim and directed it toward the walkers. Sim dragged the injured Ernest along the road until he died. After watching the recording, Jerome weeps for his father and returns home at night, not speaking to Willem about what he saw. On another day, Willem and Jerome go on a deer hunting trip with a rifle. Jerome keeps the rifle with him and hides it under his bed. The next day, he tells Willem that Ruby called him, which surprises Willem, who accuses Jerome of lying since he knew Ruby had died in an accident long ago. Then, a message arrives for Willem, written by Jerome pretending to be Ruby, asking Willem to meet at the same place where Ernest was killed. Willem doesn't understand but decides to go there to discover what's happening and how Ruby could still be alive after being shot. At night, Willem tells his wife, Mary, whose belly has grown after 7 months of pregnancy, that he's going out to sell something. Mary bids him farewell and asks him to return safely. The next day, Willem arrives at the place where Ernest was killed and calls out for Ruby. As he walks, he falls into a pit and breaks his leg, unable to stand. He cries out for help, but suddenly Jerome appears. Willem takes a deep breath, feeling relieved to see him. Willem tells him he needs help since he can't get up, but Jerome remains standing with a stone in his hand, just as Willem had a stone when he threw it at Ernest. Willem realizes that Jerome knows what happened to his father, so he apologizes and asks for forgiveness, saying it was just an accident. Willem continues to plead with Jerome to forgive him, for Mary's sake and for the baby on the way. But Jerome is unmoved by Willem's words, pulls out his rifle, and kills him. 2 days pass after Willem's death, and Mary grows worried about her husband. Jerome reassures her, telling her to wait and be patient, and perhaps he'll return. They agree on how their father or her husband died. Mary tells Jerome that they should go to the hospital to bring their mother home, as they now have enough money to buy the device that will help her walk. Jerome deletes all the recordings from Sim so that no one will know what happened to Fleam and Ernest. And with that, our movie comes to an end. To watch the upcoming summaries, don't forget to subscribe to the channel.